Republican Congressman Pat Fallon of the 4th Congressional District in North Texas, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
No, thanks for having me, Jack.
You bet. So President Trump praised the Secret Service after the third attempted assassination on him over the weekend at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. But reporters who attended the dinner said the security seemed very lax. They didn't have to go through metal detectors. They didn't have their tickets checked against a master list. They didn't even have to show their IDs, according to those that I saw posting. What do you make of this?
Well, we're going to get a briefing from Sean Curran. The Oversight Committee is going to get a briefing from Sean Curran, the director of the Secret Service, in a few hours. So I can talk a little bit more specifically about it after we have that meeting. But I will say that I think it's a really good argument to be made for a ballroom attached to the White House. And let me explain. Even as a member of Congress, when I'm invited over to the White House, there's several tranches of security that I need to go through. Not only do they need to see my ID, but I go through a magnetometer more than once because they can control that whole setting. When you're having an event at a hotel, the Secret Service doesn't own that setting until just maybe the day prior, and there's just certain things that can slip through the cracks. And we, unfortunately, in this charged political environment, I don't think that's a risk worth taking any longer.
But I mean, to your point about, different events, I don't know that this event would be held. Let's take the White House Correspondents' Dinner or any other dinner that the president, is likely to attend. It's not always going to be on the White House grounds. And I'm wondering, I heard, and I don't know if it's true, that this particular dinner was not set at the highest threat level. Should every event that the president attends be at the highest threat level?
I would think that makes complete and utter sense. One of the things that I'd like to see, something very simple, is, when you go through the TSA line, you got to go through all the tranches, left, right, like a serpentine. That is something that you're not going to see somebody sprint through that like this villain did. He just sprinted through the first breach of security. There's always going to be an outer perimeter, and that's where things are most dangerous before people go through magnetometers. But we saw the fundamental breakdowns of the Secret Service, and when I served on the task force, the assassination task force, after Butler, and then we saw even more breakdowns 2 weeks later, in Florida, where they have to be successful every single time. And unfortunately, a bad guy only needs to get lucky and succeed once. So you need redundancies built into the system. And you also need to embrace technology. These are things that the old Secret Service was not doing under the leadership of Director Curran. He has assured me that they are doing those things. And then, for instance, Jack, real quick, there was a fundamental flaw in so much as at Butler, nobody knew exactly which Secret Service agent was in charge. Was it the special agent in charge of the president's detail, or was it the special agent in charge of the field office, which would have been Pittsburgh? They couldn't answer that question because it was just fundamentally flawed doctrine that the Secret Service had. They need to fix those things going forward, or unfortunately, we're going to have another incident like this that could end in tragedy.
And one of the reasons why I wanted to interview you is because, as you mentioned, you sat on the task force that oversaw an investigation into the Secret Service and what happened in the first two assassination attempts. And I'm wondering, when you are getting your briefing, what are you going to be looking for? And were there any recommendations that were made by your committee that have not been enacted or that still need to be enacted, whether through a law passed by Congress or through rules of the agency?
That's a great point to make. And it's one of the questions I will ask the director was, number one, who was the agent in charge of that venue? So who signed off on the site and security plans? Because that's where the buck's got to stop with somebody. There's got to be accountability set. And as I said, the outer perimeter is always going to be the most dangerous. So what was the outer perimeter? And were these guests going through magnetometers? The people make claims, oh, I didn't even have to go through a magnetometer. That could be true, but it might not be. So it's one of the things I'm going to ask the director is, were there magnetometers? Did everybody go through them? And did they go through, like at the White House, more than one? Or was it just one? These are questions that absolutely need to be answered.
Was there anything about what occurred a major surprise, aside from the obvious that it happened?
Two surprises to me, and just the limited knowledge that I have of the end. One, the security footage of him just sprinting past the first perimeter, where if you had those tranches and you made people go down right, left, like a little maze, a little labyrinth, if you will, like the TSA labyrinth, that wouldn't have been able to happen unless he was a super athlete. If he was Batman or something like evil Batman, I guess. And also the fact that he didn't get shot dead right then and there. When you sprint through an outer perimeter with the president in attendance and you have a rifle and other firearms, I'm shocked they didn't just put 16 rounds into this.
So let me ask you, because, the president said he wants to have this White House Correspondents' Dinner again in the next 30 days or et cetera. And I'm wondering, what do you want to see this time around?
Well, this is what I'm going to suggest to the director is make sure if you have more than one point of entry, and you might have to do that for logistics reasons, fine, but make sure that that line progresses steadily but controlled so nobody can breach a perimeter like he breached. I would recommend probably going through more than one magnetometer, making sure the principal, the president, and his cabinet aren't there until the folks have been vetted, and they can always arrive a little later. You can just tell the folks, hey, program's going to start at 6. You have to be in your seats by 5, something along those lines. And that's just going to make the president safer.
Any concerns about the line of succession? Usually when you have, you had the president, you had the vice president, you had the Speaker of the House, you had the Secretary of State, you had the Treasury Secretary there. You had all those people there. Normally, the only time we see that is at the White House, which is obviously very well protected, the U.S. Capitol, during the State of the Union, et cetera, maybe other functions, but there are highly secured government facilities. This was not that case. Does there need to be a new law passed restricting that so that, God forbid, something happens? This doesn't become a huge crisis.
I don't know if there's got to be a law passed, but certainly have to be thinking about that and making sure that at these kind of venues that they're as secure as humanly possible. There's no doubt about that.
One other question, and that is back to the ballroom. As you know, a federal judge stopped construction at the site at the White House, saying it needs congressional approval. Do you agree with that? And would you support, I believe there's a bill that was proposed in the Senate by Republicans that would provide $400 million for the construction?
I personally think that's an executive function, and the legislative branch shouldn't get involved. I think we should definitely protect our power of the purse and assert ourselves more in other realms. But in this particular one, I would leave that to the president. And you think about this with largely Democratic opposition to the president's plan of the ballroom, he's only going to be president for less than 3 more years. And then whoever is president beyond that, there's going to be a Republican president, so there's going to be Democratic presidents. And they're going to get to enjoy that venue. And because I think it does serve the Republic and it doesn't serve one particular person.
But why give up the power of the purse?
I don't want to give up the power of the purse at all. I think that's what I'm saying. We should reassert our power. And I think this one, if you can get private donations to pay for it, I'm all for saving taxpayer money. And also look at precedent. I mean, I know that there's some presidents that have refurbed the White House. I just have to look into, and I'd be curious to know if they did that with appropriated funds or did they do that with donated funds?
And well, if it does come to this, would you support a bill then? If the Senate does pass this, is this something you would support, using funds from the taxpayers?
I would put an amendment on that bill to say that I support the construction of the ballroom using private funds.
Only.
Yeah. Save the
All right.
taxpayers a buck. Give them a break. We got a $40 trillion debt.
Okay, so let's turn to the Supreme Court's 2 rulings this week on redistricting. One today on the Louisiana case, and the other earlier this week in Texas. First, let's start with today's case. Their decision, their ruling, further restricts the use of race when it comes to drawing congressional districts, state districts, but it also further restricts the Voting Rights Act. What do you think about this?
I think they were great decisions. The Voting Rights Act had its place and it needs to sunset because we're in a different country. We've turned the page more than once. And it just so happens that for the Democratic Party, they have a particular demographic in the United States, and that would be Black Americans, that vote overwhelmingly in their favor. And so when we're looking and drawing colorblind maps, we're just drawing R's and D's. And that's the way that have drawn the lines in Texas. And we should continue to be able to do it that way. It's just very convenient that I think the Democrats have bastardized the Voting Rights Act as a kind of a protection plan for themselves. And this is some data that I wanted to share because no one ever talks about this. So let's look at the 5 largest states that are controlled solely by Republicans, and then conversely with the 5 largest states controlled by Democrats. When you look at the 5 largest states that are completely controlled by Democrats, which would be, and this is at the beginning of the year, California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Washington State, you have 117 seats, or 117 congressional seats. 95 of them are controlled by Democrats, 24 are controlled by Republicans. That's 81% Democratic control. When you look conversely at the Republican, the 5 largest states are Florida, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, and Ohio. There's 104 seats, 72 Republicans, 32 Democrats. That's 69%. So the Democrats clearly were just much better at gerrymandering than Republicans were. And what Texas did with going and creating 5 more right-leaning or red-leaning districts would have then taken that 72-32 to 77-27, which would have been 74%. Still not even equal to the Democratic gerrymandering. And then that's not good enough for Newsom. He goes ahead and draws California 48-4, making 92% of the districts, basically a quarter of almost a quarter of all Democrats in the country that are here in Washington, D.C., were going to be from California. So it was egregious. We were just trying to level the playing field. And then the Democrats said, nope, we're going to be even better at gerrymandering.
What do you say to African Americans and Latinos who may feel they may not be able to receive fair representation in the future?
I say to the Latinos, you're receiving much more. I think it's even more fair considering that President Trump won a majority of Hispanics in Texas. So I think you got to take the Hispanic Americans largely out of that equation and question in the future moving forward. As far as African Americans go, you're going to be the ones that I represent. They're represented vigorously because I believe in limited government, low taxes, reasonable regulation. And we have a colorblind office. I don't care. You got a constituent issue, we're going to address it for you.
And what impact do you think that the Louisiana case will have on the Texas case going forward? And I ask that because while the 2025 maps are now finalized for the 2026 midterms, what I'm told is that this case is going to go back to the district court, and there will likely be a trial on the 2025 maps next year in 2027. So do you think that this Louisiana case will have an impact on the Texas case?
Certainly seems to me, I'll be talking to some attorneys smarter than I am, but thank God I am not an attorney. But it seems to me it'll strengthen the Texas case, and I think we will land and continue at least 30 right-leaning districts. I don't actually think we're going to get 30 districts. Henry Cuellar is going to be very difficult to beat in South Texas, and I think he would have won as a Republican or a Democrat. He's a very unique representative, and he's in a very unique district. All those, as you know, those southern Texas counties are trending red, but we'll see what happens in November this year.
What about Vicente Gonzalez's seat?
I think he's going to lose. I certainly hope he does. We'll see. And I don't know. We don't have do we have a nominee there yet, or are they in a runoff? I think they might. There's so many new seats in Texas
A lot of new
right now.
seats, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up with 12, 13. We're looking at, I think, 12 or 13 new Republican members just in Texas alone.
And then my last question to you is the midterms this year. I know
Mhm.
Florida is in the process of redistricting its maps. We saw Virginia, and there's still a big question mark about that. You mentioned California and obviously Texas. How do you think this is all going to shake out? Because a lot of people think the Democrats are going to win the House in November, and then when they take over in January.
Well, the election is not going to be held today. And I think that's good news for Republicans. I can remember Kevin McCarthy, when he was speaker, talking to us about when the gas prices were at their worst and when they were at their apex, when Joe Biden was president. We were polling so well. And Kevin McCarthy said, if I had 3 wishes, the election would be held today, today, and today. because we probably would have won 235 seats then, or maybe even 240, but it wasn't held that day. And then as things flattened out, and we did end up holding the House, but not by much. I mean, 220 to 215, an historically narrow majority. So it's way too early to tell. If the election were held today, probably wouldn't land all that well for Republicans, but it's not. It's going to be November. And we're going to see if Iran can smooth over. And Iran's in a very precarious position right now. You have an IRGC running wild. And really, it seems to me they're just intent on ruling over the ashes. They don't really care about the fate of their own country, because there are pragmatists in Tehran that want to come to some kind of an accord and peace, but they're not in power because they don't have the guns. It's the IRGC I think we're dealing with there. So, but if Iran smooths out and the economy continues to do well and it roars with gas prices going down, that's going to reflect inflation. And we could do a lot better than people think.
We will leave it there. Congressman Pat Fallon of the 4th Congressional District. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack. God bless. Take care.
Take care.